Le 7 novembre 1918,
On 7th of November
lorsque
1918,
le caporal clairon
when
Pierre
bugle player
Sellier
Corporal Pierre Sellier
sonna le premier
sounded
cessez-le-feu
the initial ceasefire
vers 10 heures du matin,
at around 10 o'clock in the morning,
bien des hommes ne purent y croire.
many soldiers could not believe it. Then they slowly left their positions, and further away along the front lines, the same bugles repeated the ceasefire and then sounded the last post before the bells spread the news across the entire country.
Le 11 novembre 1918,
November 11th, 1918, at 11 in the morning,
il y a 100 ans,
100 years ago,
jour pour jour,
day
heure pour heure,
on the day, on the
à
hour,
Paris comme dans toute la
in
France,
Paris and
les
all
clairons
around
retentirent,
France, the
les cloches
bugles
de toutes les églises
sounded and the bells pealed.
ont sonné. C'était l'armistice.
Armistice was being announced.
C'était la fin
This
de 4
was
longues
the
et
end
terribles années de
of
combats
4
meurtriers.
long, terrible deaths and fighting.
N'était pas la paix.
But armistice
Et à l'Est,
did not signify
pendant
peace.
plusieurs années,
And
d'effroyables
in the
guerres.
East, for many years, devastating wars continued to be fought.
Ce même jour,
Here,
les
on this
Français et
very
leurs
day,
alliés
the French
ont
and their
célébré leur
allies
victoire.
celebrated their victory.
Ils s'étaient battus pour leur patrie
They had
et
fought
pour la liberté.
for their homeland and for their
Ils avaient
freedom,
consenti pour cela tous les sacrifices
and for this they
et
had
toutes
made
les
huge
souffrances.
sacrifices and suffered untold
Ils avaient
hardships.
connu un enfer
They had experienced a
que
hell,
nul ne peut se
a hell that
représenter.
no one can imagine.
Nous devrions prendre un instant
We
pour
should
faire
take a
revenir à nous
moment
cet immense
to
cortège de
bring back
combattants
into our
où
memory
défilent
all
des
these
soldats de la
fighters,
métropole et de l'Empire,
French soldiers from
des
the continent and the
légionnaires et des
colonies,
garibaldiens, avec
around
des
the
étrangers
world,
venus du monde entier, parce que la France représentait pour eux tout ce qu'il y avait de
fighters
beau
from
dans le
the
monde.
Legion, foreigners
Avec les
that had
ombres
come
de
from
Peugeot,
the whole world,
premier
because
tombé,
for them,
et de
France symbolized
Trébuchon,
all that was
dernier mort
beautiful
pour la
in the
France,
world.
10 minutes avant l'armistice.
Let us summon the
Voici
ghosts of
l'instituteur
Peugeot, the first to
Kléber
have fallen, and Trébuchon, the
défenseur de
last who
Gaumont,
died for France 10 minutes
Apollinaire,
before the
Blaise
armistice.
Sandra,
We
au
have
régiment de
teacher
marche de
Kléber
la
Dupuis,
Légion
defender
étrangère,
of Douaumont,
les soldats des
Guillaume
régiments
Apollinaire,
basques,
Blaise
bretons,
Sandra
marseillais,
from the
le
infantry of the
capitaine
Foreign
de Gaulle,
Legion,
que personne
the
n'avait
soldiers
reconnaissé,
from the regiments of the
Julien
Basque
Green,
country,
l'Américain,
Brittany or
à la
Marseille,
porte
the
de son
Captain de Gaulle that
ambulance,
was unknown at the time,
Monterland
Julien Green, the
et
American
Giono,
with his ambulance, Monterland
Charles
Giono,
Péguy, Alain
Charles
Fournier,
Péguy and
tombés
Alain
dans les
Fournier,
premières semaines.
who
Joseph
all
Kessel,
fell during the first
venu de
weeks.
Orenbourg, en
Joseph
Russie,
Kessel, who came from Orenburg in Russia,
et tous les autres,
and all the others,
qui sont les
who are
nôtres,
our family,
auxquels plutôt nous appartenons,
the family that
et
we
dont on peut
belong
lire
to
les noms
today,
sur chaque monument,
the names of whom
des hauteurs
can be
solaires
read
de la
off
Corse
each
aux vallées
monument,
des Alpes,
from the
de la
sun-kissed
Sologne
mountains
au
of
Vaud,
Corsica
de la
to the
Pointe
valleys
du Raz
of
à
the
la frontière
Alps,
espagnole.
from the Sologne
Oui,
to the Vosges,
une
from the
seule
Pointe du Raz to the
France, rurale et
Spanish
urbaine,
border,
bourgeoise,
one
aristocratique
France,
et
rural,
populaire,
urban,
de
bourgeois,
toutes les couleurs,
aristocratic,
où le curé et
working class, where
l'anticlérical ont
all the
souffert
colors
côte à côte,
and
et dont
where the
l'héroïsme et
parish
la
priest
douleur
and the
nous ont
secularists
fait.
suffered side by side, and whose
Durant
pain
ces 4
shaped
années,
us during these 4
l'Europe
years
manqua de se
of
suicider.
fighting. Europe nearly committed
L'humanité
suicide.
s'était enfoncée dans le
Humankind
labyrinthe hideux
had gone down the
d'affrontements
sinister
sans merci,
path of merciless
dans un
fighting,
enfer qui
the
engloutit
kind of
tous les
hell that
combattants,
devours all
de
fighters,
quelque côté qu'ils soient,
whatever side they might
de
be
quelque
on,
nationalité
whatever
qu'ils
country they hail from.
soient. Dès le lendemain,
The day after the armistice,
dès le lendemain de l'armistice, commença
the very next
le
day after
funèbre
the
décompte
armistice, the
des morts,
sinister task of counting the deaths, counting the dead, the wounded, the disfigured, the missing started.
Ici, en France,
Here in
mais aussi
France,
dans chaque pays,
but also in all the other belligerent countries, families waited for months on end in vain the return of a father, a brother, a husband, a fiancé,
parmi ces absents,
and amongst
il y eut
those
aussi ces femmes
that were
admirables,
absent, there were
engagées auprès des
also
combattants.
admirable women who worked alongside the soldiers as volunteers.
10 millions de morts,
10 million dead,
6 millions de blessés et mutilés,
6 million wounded,
3 millions de veuves,
3 million widows,
6 millions d'orphelins,
6 million orphans,
des millions de victimes
millions
civiles,
of civilian
1
victims,
milliard d'obus
1
tirés sur le
billion
seul sol de
shells dropped
France.
on France only.
Le monde
The world discovered the extent of the wounds that combatant fervor had obscured. The tears of the dying were followed by those of the survivors. Because on this very soil in France, the entire world had come to fight. Young men from French provinces, from overseas territories, young men hailing from Africa, the Pacific, the Americas, Asia, came to die far from their families in villages of which they did not even know the name. The millions of witnesses from all nations then told of the horrific fighting, the stench of the trenches, the bleakness of the battlefields, the screams of the wounded in the night, the destruction wrought on the fields in bloom, which were reduced to a cinder. Many of those who went home, who made it home, had lost their youth, their dreams, their appetite for life. Many went home disfigured, blind, amputated. Victors and vanquished were then plunged for a long time in the same darkness. 1918, that was 100 years ago. It seems very far away, but it was only yesterday. I have seen the countryside where the most terrible battles were fought. And in that countryside, I saw the land still gray and barren from the fighting. I saw villages destroyed with no one left alive to rebuild them, and whose ruins still today attest to the folly of mankind. I saw on our monuments the litany of names of French soldiers alongside the names of foreign soldiers who died under the skies of France. I saw the bodies of our soldiers buried in the fields where nature has reclaimed its rights, just as I had seen in mass graves, side by side, the bones of German and French soldiers who had fought during a vicious winter over a few square yards of soil. The traces of that war never faded, have not faded from French soil. They have not faded from Europe, from the Middle East, nor from our memories, all of us around the world. Let us remember. Let us not forget, because the remembrance of these sacrifices urges us to be worthy of those that died for us, so that we may live free. Let us remember, let us take away nothing of what was pure, of the ideals, of the lofty principles of our elders' patriotism. This vision of France as a generous nation, of France as a project, as France, the bearer of universal values, was displayed during these dark hours as the very opposite of the selfishness of a nation which only looks after its own interests, because patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is a betrayal of patriotism by saying, our interests first, who cares about the others? We erase what a nation holds dearest, what gives it life, what makes it great, and what is essential, its moral values. Let us remember, we in France, what Jacques Clemenceau proclaimed on the day of victory 100 years ago to this day before the National Assembly, after which members of the Parliament started chanting the French national anthem. He said, France, fighting for rights and lawfulness, fighting for freedom, France shall always and forever be the soldier defending aspirations. Those are the values, those are the virtues that drove those whom we honor today, those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the battles they fought for their nation and for democracy. These values and virtues made them strong because they guided their hearts. The lesson we draw of the Great War cannot be rancor and resentment against other nations, and it cannot be allowing the past to be forgotten. The Great War is a foundation that obliges us to think forward to the future and think of our essential values. As early as 1918, our predecessors, our forebears, laid the foundations of the first forms of international cooperation. They brought down empires. They recognized many nations. They redrew national borders. They even dreamt at that time of a political Europe. But humiliation, the spirit of revenge, the economic and moral crisis of those years fueled the rise of nationalism and totalitarianism. War, once again, 20 years later, destroyed the paths toward peace. Today, here, peoples of the whole world, on this sacred esplanade, the tomb of our unknown soldier, this anonymous soldier who symbolizes all those who die for their homeland. See so many of your leaders come together. Each one of them brings with them so many combatants and martyrs of their own nation. Each one of them represents the face of the hope for which an entire young generation agreed to die, the face of a world that is once again peaceful, where friendship between peoples prevails over war, a world where the words of men must speak louder than the clamor of arms, where the spirit of conciliation must prevail over the temptation of cynicism, where bodies in fora exist, allowing former enemies to come together to dialogue as a pledge of a harmony that at last is possible to achieve. And on our continent, this is represented by the ties of friendship between Germany and France and the desire to build a bedrock of common goals. This hope is called the European Union, a union freely entered into, never before seen in history, a union that has freed us of our civil wars. This this hope is called the Organization of the United Nations, which is a guarantee of the spirit of cooperation to defend the common goods of a world that has its fates indefectibly linked, and that has drawn the painful lessons of the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles. We have the certainty that the worst is never over, that the worst, rather, can be overcome as long as we have men and women of goodwill to guide us. So, unrelentingly, without shame, without fear, let us be those men and women of goodwill. I know there are old demons which are coming back to the surface. They are ready to wreak chaos and death. There are new ideologies that manipulate religion, that spread obscurantism. History sometimes threatens to take its sinister course once again and compromise, undermine our legacy of peace that we thought we'd forever sealed with the blood of our forebears. I wish this day of commemoration to be the day when we renew our eternal pledge to honor our dead. Let us once more pledge as nations to place peace above all else, because we know the price, we know the weight, we know the demands. All of us here, political leaders, we must, on this day, 11th of November 2018, reassert to our citizens our huge responsibility, the responsibility of handing down to our children a world such as was dreamt of by previous generations. Let us add our hopes together instead of seeing our fears oppose each other. Together we can thwart the threats of climate warming, of poverty, hunger, sickness, inequalities, ignorance. We have started this struggle. We can win this battle. Let's continue to do so, because victory is possible. Together, we can break with the new betrayal of the intellectuals that feed falsehoods, that breeds falsehoods, that accepts injustices which undermine our citizens, fuel extremist speech and contemporary obscurantism. Together, we can foster an amazing development of science, arts, exchange, education, medicine. These are developments that I see happening everywhere around the world. Because if we wish it to be so, our world is at the dawn of a new era, at the dawn of a civilization that gives pride of place to man's ambitions and faculties. And to ruin this hope by giving in to the fascination for withdrawal, isolationism, violence, and domination would be a grave error that future generations would very rightly make us responsible for. Today, here together, let us face the judgment of future generations with dignity. France knows what it owes its soldiers and to the soldiers who came from around the world. It recognizes their greatness. France respectfully and solemnly pays tribute to those from other countries who died for France, those that in the past it fought against. Our feet only and in vain rise up from the soil that is a shrine to the dead. These were the words of Guillaume Apollinaire. On these tombs, where they are buried, we want to see arise the certainty that a better world is possible if we so wish it, if we decide to build it, if we want it with our entire soul. Today, on 11th November 2018, 100 years after a massacre, the scars of which are still visible, I thank you for gathering in brotherhood. We hope that this gathering will not last but one day. This brotherhood, this fraternity, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, is an invitation to enter into the only battle that is right, the struggle for peace, the struggle for a better world. Long live peace amongst peoples and amongst states. Long live the free nations of the world. Long live friendship amongst peoples. Long live France.